Hello once again, AP Psychology students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have got notes for Chapter 11, talking a little bit about the components of intelligence. In our last section, we were talking a little bit about intelligence quotients. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more at length at kind of what intelligence is and how that's kind of broken down in some different areas in this day and age. So, to start with, we're going to talk a little bit about a savant syndrome. And we talked about savants in the past few days. And we know that savants are individuals who have kind of a remarkable talent in some particular area. And it might be with mathematics, perhaps maybe multiplying numbers very quickly in their heads, or the remembering of certain dates and the events that happen on those. But typically, people who are savants have this one remarkable intelligence or talent. But in other areas, perhaps maybe even socially, they happen to be a little bit slower than a lot of other people their own age. And a lot of times we think about today individuals that are diagnosed with certain types of autism or who are on the autistic spectrum that might have something very similar to a savant syndrome. And what's interesting is that as a result of studying savants, psychologists believe that the essence of intelligence is more than just, verbal factors and such, that it actually might be a single general factor. And that kind of leads us into talking about what is known as the G factor, or the general factor, if you want to call it that. There was a psychologist, his name was Charles Spearman, and Spearman, who was British, um, was able to show that individual scores in different tests involving problems of many kinds are often highly correlated. And in a sense, he kind of came up with a common general intelligence, kind of the underlining performance across all intellectual domains, if you want to call it that. Um, so, in a sense, um, this one underlying factor could possibly be, what sets some people apart. There was a man also named Raymond Cattell. Cattell, uh, we may talk a little bit more at length about because he did a lot of work within the theories of personality, but he also talked a little bit about intelligence. And in 1963, he determined that general intelligence, that G factor, could probably be broken down into two independent components, what is known as crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. Crystallized intelligence, for the most part, is the ability to access knowledge. You think about your long-term memory and being able to pull out all sorts of information, that might be trivial or such whenever you wanted to retrieve that. That's really that crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is the ability to see complex relationships and to solve problems. And in many cases, to be able to do that very quickly. A lot of times it involves using algorithms, but it could also be, could involve using maybe heuristics. Uh, Sometimes fluid intelligence, if we were talking about it maybe in terms of an intelligence test, may be measured by the testing of like block designs or spatial visualization, like rotating, perhaps maybe, a diagram or so, um, which is a little different than crystallized intelligence, which is, basically, kind of common knowledge or such. All right. This kind of leads to talking about Sternberg and Gardner's theories on intelligence. We're going to talk about the triadic theory and the multiple intelligence theories. All right, so we're going to start with Sternberg and talking a little bit about his theories on intelligence. And what you're going to find is that, as we're talking about Sternberg and Gardner, there are some similarities here. So Sternberg, he had the triadic theory of intelligence. dealing with practical intelligence, analytical intelligence, and creative intelligence. And he basically believed that practical intelligence was this ability to have street smarts, to cope with your environment, to be able to read people, to deal with things in kind of a practical manner. Your analytical intelligence is this ability to analyze problems, perhaps maybe using what would be the kind of like today's prototypical components of most IQ tests, um, being able to find correct answers and such. Okay, logical reasoning, if you want to call it that. And then he came up with this idea of creative intelligence. This is a form of intelligence that helps people see new relationships among concepts, involves some insight and creativity. And with all of these, the term for Sternberg's theory of intelligence, so called because it combines the three tries, the main forms of intelligence. So it's like a trio of things like practical, analytical, creative, and they kind of work together, and yet they're somewhat independent from one another. Okay, Gardner um, kind of believed that your traditional IQ tests were really limited as far as looking at our abilities, and he argued that there were some different mental abilities that needed to be kind of honed in on. Your linguistic, logical, mathematical, spatial, musical, bodily, kinesthetic, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. And as we get to the end here, you're also going to hear a little bit about some newer ones that he wanted to add: naturalistic intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and existential intelligence. So when we talk about linguistic intelligence, this is talking primarily about your ability to look at vocabulary and reading comprehension measured by traditional IQ test, just as well as your logical, mathematical, again, dealing with analogies, mathematical problems, logical problems that you're going to find on typical IQ test. Spatial abilities, the ability to form mental images of objects, to think about the relationship in space of different items. This could also be a little bit like talking about creative intelligence, perhaps maybe with Sternberg. But at the same time, spatial intelligence could be things, kind of could be measured in skills like art appreciation or the ability to draw or the ability of an athlete to kind of know where a ball is in play and how a certain play is supposed to move around a court or a field or such. Musical intelligence, the ability to perform, compose, appreciate musical patterns, including patterns of rhythms and pitches. Bodily kinesthetic, the ability to control movement and coordination. These are skills that are important to not only like a dancer, but possibly even like a surgeon. Interpersonal, the ability to understand other people's emotions, or motives, or actions, works well, as far as like when we're talking about how we relate to one another and maybe in a working relationship. And then there's intrapersonal, the ability to know oneself and developing a sense of identity. This idea that you can regulate your own life and regulate your behavior and such. Okay, Gardner, uh, kind of starting in the late 1990s, proposed that there could be some additional areas of intelligence. And, one thing kind of going back to our intrapersonal, some people talk about that maybe in the terms of like emotional intelligence, which is really kind of a hot area in the field of intelligence right now. But going back to these final three here, naturalistic intelligence, the ability to classify living things, in diverse groups. So it could be, an individual's knowledge of different specimens of trees or plants or maybe even animals and how um, they differ from one another and how they're the same. Spiritual intelligence, the ability to think, in abstract spiritual terms, that puts oneself in a spiritual frame of mind. And then the existential intelligence. This permits individuals to think about the largest and the smallest components of the universe, the purpose of our existence, the meaning of death, and to deal with profound emotional experiences such as love. All right. Thank you for listening.